if that is indeed the same person, and they're the only ones that can make that deactivation. Same for deceased records. So we get information from Department of Vital Records, from other government sources that say these are people that have been are deceased in the state of Wisconsin, and that information then goes to the clerks as a registration list alert. And again, they're going to look at what we sent them, they're going to look at the voter record, and then they make the determination. They're the only ones under law that make that determination if it is the same person, and then they mark them as deceased and inactivate their record. Clerks have a lot of other ways to get that information, and because we're so decentralized, because we have 1,850 city, town, and village clerks, a lot of times they're going to have this information before we even do at the state. And so they're able to take action based on reliable information to deactivate those voters if they get it before the state provides that information to them as well. The same with duplicate information. So every night the statewide system is taking a look to see, has somebody with similar information registered to vote in 2 different jurisdictions? And if there are enough similarities, that gets flagged for those jurisdictions because the voter can only be registered one place, right? And so then the clerk is going to go in and say, yep, I've got that voter's registration, they just moved here, and then the clerk in the former address is going to deactivate that record. But we're still going to have that history, right? And so they're going to take care of merging that together because we need to know that that person moved. They might now be in this city, but we need to know that at one point they were registered and voted here. And so they bring that information together. Adjudicated incompetent, that's a process that's continuing to evolve, but the courts give information to us and to the local jurisdictions about people who have been adjudicated incompetent to vote. The law really only gives the clerk the ability to see that information, to know that private information about people, and then to, again, make those determinations. We're also able to, on a nightly basis, run checks against the DMV system. And what this allows us to do is when somebody registers to vote or their information is updated through the registration process, let's say their last name changes or other information, we're able to, on a nightly basis, compare those records with the Wisconsin Department of Motor Vehicles. And if there's some type of discrepancy found, or let's say, a clerk was hand keying in a paper registration form, and sometimes those are messy, right? And sometimes you might think that a letter is different than what the voter meant to put on that form. The DMV check is going to allow them to see those discrepancies and then work with the voter or go back to the form and make that correction to that voter registration record as well. And so those are some of the data points that we're able to provide the local officials, but they're the ones making the determinations. They're the ones that the law gives the authority to deactivate a voter, to take them off the poll list, or to put a voter on the poll list if they get registered to vote. Anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, for us, this is pretty much an everyday event. We search, one of the things we search through is obituaries. Every now and then, especially before an election, somebody dies like on Monday, and there'll be a death notice published in the paper so that we can try to catch them just in case they had an absentee ballot. So we make a special effort right before the elections to be checking the obituaries, the death notices, and things like that as frequently as possible to try to catch anybody who might have died over the weekend or something like that. And we do find people where, they died on Saturday, the election was on Tuesday, and we'll grab their ballot, take it out, put their death notice or obituary on it, and then we give it back to the polling places, and at the polling place, that's where they'll mark them as deceased and not deactivate the ballot. Then they won't give them voter credit, and they'll explain why that person was deceased. So we do quite a bit of that. We get a lot of registration alerts. And when we get something like a duplicate, that's pretty common, so we go through those. But those DMV checks are really important. You catch a lot of human mistakes. Sometimes people will register to vote and they'll just write their first name and they'll do it kind of as their, like I might write Nick instead of Nicholas. And then it'll pop up on the DMV check. And we catch mistakes from that all the time. A lot of people spell their name wrong. It might be surprised to know them, but people do spell their names wrong. And their handwriting can be pretty bad sometimes, mine included. So I'll find things that, well, that look like an R, but it's actually an N, or vice versa, things like that. So those DMV checks and duplicate alerts are really important. We send out letters to people. So if there's a felon list, we send out a felon letter, and we do the deactivations. And if there is a DMV check where we're not entirely sure, I'll call the voter and I'll ask them, it looks like you put this on the registration form. My DMV check says it might be wrong, so how do you actually spell your name? Or what is your actual date of birth? And if that doesn't work, we also can send them letters, and we catch people like that too. And if people put their email addresses on the registration forms, we'll send them an email. And we do a lot of voter list maintenance activities, especially between elections. I see in here it says registration audit postcard. We do get those postcards back after the elections, and we go through, and if we have to deactivate people or change things, we make those changes after the elections.
One thing, you guys are good, this is probably the same thing, is that we also, at the county clerk level, we also do this for our smaller municipalities. Like in Oakland County, we have 18 municipalities. The 3 big ones do their own voter list maintenance, but we do it in our office for the other 15 smaller ones. So again, we do pretty much everything Nick said there as well too. So we kind of have to follow that same process, and we are very conscientious about trying to catch everything we can, calling people, letting people know, something's doesn't look right, or we're questioning something. So.
And we do 27 out of the 30 municipalities in Chippewa County.
Well, that hasn't changed.
No. Well, and I do just want to, give all the clerks, county and municipal, so many props, because like you said, list maintenance is happening every hour of every day in each of the local jurisdictions. It's something that, never sleeps. And when we send those registration list alerts at the state level, so we don't have any legal authority to call them and say, you have to deactivate this record, or you have to take this person off the poll list. But we can send them those alerts, and then we send them reminders constantly and say, hey, we sent you an alert, you need to look at that. And they do. They do a phenomenal job of looking at every one of those registration list alerts that's sent to them. And heading into election day, when the poll books are printed, those alerts are typically down to 0. They have looked at every single one in every single jurisdiction to make sure that they're printing the most up-to-date, accurate poll books possible.
So I'm just gonna editorialize here. So are you getting the feeling that these municipal and county clerks are working really hard every day to make sure that our poll lists are as accurate as possible? Because that's what they do every single day that they are doing their jobs. And so on election day, you can rest assured that they've done everything they can to make sure that that election, that poll list is accurate. So I just want to say kudos to all of you. Statewide voter database.
Yeah, so the statewide voter registration database is something that is required under both federal law, the Help America Vote Act, and under state law. So Wisconsin law says that the state has to maintain a database that all of the clerks are required to use. And so what is that database? So the database is called WisVote, and when a jurisdiction registers a voter, so again, at the state level, we cannot register voters. So we don't register voters, we don't deactivate voters, we can't do that under Wisconsin law. That all happens at the local level. But the law says that they're all required to track those things in the statewide database. And so when somebody registers to vote, they have to put that information into the statewide voter registration database so that we have that record, so that that person is then eligible to be able to receive or be sent an absentee ballot, to be on the poll book, all the things that happen once you're registered to vote. The law also requires that all of our municipalities have to track absentee ballots as well. So if somebody requests an absentee ballot, that request goes to your municipal clerk, and they have to log that in the statewide database. When that ballot is sent out, they've got to log that date. They've got to say, this is the date I sent out that absentee ballot. And when the clerk gets the ballot back, they have to log that in the system too and say, I got the person's ballot back. If the ballot has some kind of problem, or the certificate has some kind of problem, then they can also track that as well and say, yep, I got their absentee ballot back, but the certificate is missing a witness, or the certificate is missing other information. They can put that into the system too. And why is that important? Because My Vote, which is the public-facing side of WisVote, is where you as the voter can go and see that information, right? So if you want to make sure that your voter registration is up to date, if you want to get registered to vote at your new address, so let's say you moved and you need to get registered to vote, you can go to My Vote and you can get registered to vote, and that information then goes to your municipal clerk. You can also go and track your absentee ballot. And so if you requested an absentee ballot, you can go onto My Vote to make sure that your clerk got your absentee ballot request, that they got your photo ID and everything that's required before they can send that ballot out. And then you can track it to make sure that your ballot's on its way to you, your ballot made it back to your clerk, and then after Election Day, all voters, those that vote at the polls or by absentee, you can go in and you can actually see that your participation has been recorded as well. Because that's another thing that the clerks are required to do, is record participation. That's where they go in and say, this is how many people voted at the polls on Election Day. They actually go through the poll book and their barcodes that they can scan to credit the voters that participated with that credit so that it displays as part of your voter record. So those states, we maintain that technology, we secure it, but all of the data, every single data point that's available to you through the My Vote site, that's coming from your clerk, right? So the clerks are the custodians of their voters' data. The state is just maintaining and building the technology that the clerks utilize and that voters use to be able to interact with their information.
That was a lot of information. Anybody else have any?
Case where you have a senior and a junior in a poll book line, this person signed on the right line, but in a different city, because they registered on Election Day. So it flags a lot of human errors that can get made right away and gives us a chance to try to fix those immediately. So it's a really great system to work with.
Okay, we are opening up the floor to you for questions. No way. No. Okay. So when you. Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you get a request for absentee and you send out a ballot, and that ballot is received, how do I know when that comes back? How do I know that's an absentee ballot? When you take it out of the envelope, and do you know it's an absentee ballot?
Oh, when we take them out of the envelope?
How do you know it's an absentee ballot?
Well, there's a couple signs. One, the easiest way to know is that it's going to be folded in fourths.
That's a clear sign, yeah.
That's usually a pretty clear sign. It's also initialed by the municipal clerk that it's an absentee ballot that got sent out. If it's a ballot that went to a care facility, it'll have my initials on it. It'll also have the initials of the special voting deputies that went and administered the voting at the care facility. So you can keep track of it that way and see that it has the initials for absentee and it looks like it was folded into fourths. That information is all right available as soon as you open up the envelope.
So now we precipitated some questions. All right, I'll shut up. Terry.
So is there any other identifying mark on that ballot to make it a legal ballot other than the clerk's initial? Would it be possible for somebody to print a ballot and knowing the clerk's initials, copy the initials and then send it out?
That's a great question because it's actually a city and county question. So my initial is only one small part of it. The way the ballots themselves are printed, as she's showing an example, it has those dots on the outside. Unless you have those exactly correct, the machine itself will say, oh, this isn't correct. So you have to have the exact right pattern from the county clerk programming, and it would have my initial on it.
So you will, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that with Clear Ballot. So when I was at a meeting, and I had a couple gentlemen who told me that there was nothing keeping them from making copies of ballots and putting them in the optical scan or the ballot box. And I said, well, there is. There's all these things that have to occur, and you have to have poll workers that are not paying attention, which generally is not the case. So, yes.
For the, actually, two questions. On the electronic machines, A, are they ever connected to the internet? And B, the programs for the machine, how do I know that if I'm voting for candidate A, it's registering the vote for candidate A and not for candidate B?
We're gonna, yeah, we'll talk about the programming part and how they know that as they test them. But the other one we're gonna get to when we talk about with the electronic voting equipment, okay? Yes.
So when we do the public test, so before the election, as part of the programming, we have, there's by statute, it tells us what we need to test for, make sure every candidate can be read, or it looks for overvotes, undervotes, and a blank ballot. So we make up these sheets that we marked that we're going to use as our checkpoint, and then we take actual ballots and we fill them in. This one is the blank one, so whatever. But like making sure, like if I vote for this one, this was the overvote. So I marked 2 where it says vote for 1. The machine better kick this out to me and telling me there's an error. And then it has there, so we have the different candidates marked throughout. So then when we're done running all of those ballots, we print off the totals report. And the totals report should match what we started at the beginning. This is what we want the machine to read based on the ballots we filled out. And if the totals report does not match this, then we have a problem. And then we couldn't send the machines out if that was not the case.
And I'd say, add to that too, when the city does its testing, one, it's public, so sometimes the news shows up. But also we have 6 people that help us do the testing. And we have Democrats and Republicans. And then when we're done, we have them all initial so that the Democrats on the team and the Republicans on the team all agree that the results were accurate. So it couldn't be one side gets what they want, the other side would be there, right as a part of the process of doing the testing.
And I'll tell you, I'm not smart enough to figure out how to program something to not read the right way either.
Yeah, and you don't wanna be charged with felony, which she district attorney.
No.
No,
So,
so
I love my job, I would like to keep my job, thank you.
if the county clerk decided, I have lots of friends and family here tonight. If a county clerk decided that she was going to try to flip votes, if she was smart enough to do it, what could we charge her with?
Well, I guess you'd have to look at all, the thing in the statutes is there's usually not just one thing that would apply, it would be multiple things that would apply, because it's the nature of what you're doing, so should obviously be, misconduct in office, even regardless of what the misconduct is, for that, it would be, the misconduct would be, obviously, fraudulently creating false programming, or, because that's what you're saying she's doing. She's
Yeah,
creating
yeah.
false
Committing fraud.
programming of that,
Yep.
so it'd be fraud for that, but I would guess it would be caught beforehand, so then that would.
Hopefully.
Hopefully be the misconduct in office, because, well, if she's fraudulently programming it, then the checklist, you mentioned, that would be caught by the people who were all involved in that, unless she reprogrammed it after the testing, so.
So she would be facing thousands of dollars worth of fines and years in prison.
I think it'd be more concerned with the years in prison than the fines, because obviously if someone was trying to rig the election, I'm sure money would not be their concern, it would be the punishment aspect of it.
Okay, okay.
Can I add another point?
Yes.
So machine testing is something I like to do. The other side of it too is after we've done all of the testing, we seal the machine with tamper evidence seals on the outside so that you can't, so if someone were to try to open it, we would know that it had been opened. And, then we lock them up. We lock them up in a locked room, inside of another locked room, inside of another building. So you couldn't just have her come back in and reprogram them because she would break all of the chain of custody seals that we put on the machines. So we would know somebody was tampering with it before it even left the building.
One other thing too that I think people forget is if there was ever a recount, and you actually have the paper ballots then, it's gonna be quite obvious then. That's what people forget, is when you do that, it's always paper ballot matched against the machine total, so there's always that check and balance on that end. And it'd be hard for me to think of how you would program it so that the machine would kick it out one way, but then race it on the ballot so that the arrow was different, because if there was ever recounts, it would be quite obvious that someone had manipulated the system.
Correct. Well, you had a question?
Are we going back to pre-COVID voting regulations?
We are following all the original state statutes in elections with no COVID issues or accommodations. Is that a fair statement? Yes.
And
Yes.
the only COVID things would be maybe we now have enough pens, so everyone uses one pen, or we clean things more often than we did, but otherwise, everything should be following all the state statutes for elections.
So there will be no ballot drop boxes because in the state of Wisconsin, the law didn't allow for it, which was technically my legal opinion before the legal opinion. What else did we do that the court said? Special voting deputies will be sent to all the nursing homes, yes. Right.
Could you explain that?
Special voting deputies, I don't even know if that's in our he's an expert in the special voting deputies, although I know about him, because I wrote the law.
Special voting deputies are trained by, they're trained by me, and then we set up times with the care facilities to come to the care facilities that need a specific set of requirements, and we administer the voting there. It's kind of like setting up a mini polling place inside of the care facility. That way, the people there who wouldn't be able to make it to the polling place have an opportunity to vote. Our special voting deputies are, again, one Democrat, one Republican. It's publicly noticed ahead of time, so anybody can come and observe if they would like. It's noticed inside of the care facility. It's noticed in the newspaper. So all that information is just out there and available in case someone is interested in coming to watch. The folks there, if they want to vote, we put together a list of all of the people who have an absentee application, seeing that they're at, let's say it's Delft South and Eau Claire. Then so all these people are registered to vote. They want an absentee ballot, so we'll bring them. And if they say, I don't want to vote today, then the special voting deputies have to write down this person declined to vote for this election, but they still want to continue to vote or things like that. And the person will sign saying that they declined to vote that day. The ballots are all, we count how many we send out, we count how many we get back. That way no one can have extra ballots, they're not floating around. And we only give them about 2 hours to do a visit. So that's how it tends to work in the care facilities. Like I said, they'll tend to set up like a little polling place and just bring the people who are physically able to come to the little polling place to vote. And then it's voting absentee, so it's my initials are on the ballot, the special voting deputy's initials are on the ballot. And then if there's a person who is physically unable to come to that place, then the special voting deputies will go to their room and do the voting there with that person.
And it's just like regular absentee ballots where they're put in the sealed envelope with the signatures on, so that way those envelopes are what comes back. It's not, someone isn't filling out a ballot and then they're just handing it in. All of them are in the sealed certified envelopes.
Yeah, that's a good point. So they're all sealed in the envelopes. then all the envelopes are collected. There's a log of all the activities that they did on that visit. Then they're put in a ballot bag. The ballot bag is sealed with the tamper evident seal. Then it comes back to us, and then we verify the seal that they wrote down is the seal that we broke. The information from all the voters is what we have in front of us. So all that information gets recorded and then put into WisVote, so that way on election day, it can be accurately represented in the poll book, and then the ballots are brought to the polling place that way.
Okay, Mike?
Thanks, Kathy. But to follow up on this gentleman's question, so basically to say that we'll have no drop boxes and that we will have special voting deputies, that is to say that we are going to go back to pre-COVID voting process, which is in fact then an admission that in 2020, we didn't follow the law. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mike, during COVID, we were looking at a way to get the ballots to the nursing home residents because the nursing home administrators would not allow the special voting deputies in.
Right.
So,
Which doesn't address the drop
Wisconsin
box.
Election Commission
Yep.
had to make a decision on how to get the ballots to those nursing home residents.
Right.
And they decided to mail them. Now, that's not how I would have done it. That's not how you would have done it.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, they weren't gonna let them in. So they had to make some sort of decision. And to be perfectly honest, brutally honest, my colleagues didn't wanna go back in and make some decisions as the legislature should have. And so I hold them accountable as well, including myself.
Okay, but that doesn't necessarily address the drop boxes. I mean, the special deputies, yes, but the drop boxes were not needed, and yet they were used in 2020.
Yes, and it was kind of a nationwide push that, because of the massive numbers of
Sure.
ballots,
Yep.
they were gonna provide that. And as you know, you get a few lawyers in a room, and they can argue about what is means.
Right.
And, you know, my friend and colleague, Dean Knudsen, said that the law was silent. I said, no, it's not, Dean, it's very clear. It says you return it by mail, or you return it to the clerk. That's not silent. The Wisconsin Election Commission, not Megan, not any of the staff, the appointed people that we appointed for the Wisconsin Election Commission made that decision. I wouldn't have made it because that was my legal interpretation, but the lawyers persuaded them to make that decision to accommodate. And to be perfectly honest, I think they're probably, you know, more reliable than the mail service, but, you know, that's a whole other argument. So I understand this. I get it. I think we all understand it. The Supreme Court spoke. But here's something that I want to make very clear. Because this happened administratively, because a clerk made a decision administratively that might not have been the right decision, because the Wisconsin Election Commission made decisions that the court didn't agree with, does not mean you can overthrow the election. It is an administrative decision that was wrong. But that doesn't make the ballots, the voters' ballots, illegal, fraudulent. They are not. You cannot take my vote away because the clerk or the Wisconsin Election Commission made a mistake or a huge error. But you can't take my vote away. We can't take other people's votes away because of administrative malfeasance or whatever you want to call it. So there's a difference between voter fraud and election malfeasance or election error or whatever you want to call it. There's a difference. And I have many people I've spoken to that thinks because Scott McDonald told everyone they could be an indefinitely confined voter. Well, that was a stupid thing for him to say, and I called him up and yelled at him right away the next morning. Because he shouldn't be doing that as an elected official. The Supreme Court said so to him, but they didn't penalize him. They didn't do anything to him. But they didn't overthrow the election either because of it. And so that's what we want to, we know everything didn't run perfectly. We know that everything never runs perfectly in running an election with millions of voters. But what we have to recognize it, acknowledge it, and work with the legislature to fix it. But we can't throw out legitimate votes.
Just, sorry, one last, if I could. And I don't disagree. And let me also say that I think here in Chippewa County, and it's in La Crosse County, where I'm from, I think many of the county clerks do a wonderful job, and you're doing the best you can. I give you great credit. The concern, of course, is raised with Dane County and Milwaukee County and other counties as to whether or not they're following what law we think. And you're right that you can't just invalidate elections simply because of bad advice from whomever gave it. That you can't do that. But in the same sense, we do understand that that does open up tremendous opportunity for fraud for those with nefarious means and purposes. Not suggesting that necessarily happen, but that is something that we need to be aware of going forward. That if we're going to continue to make these mistakes, people will take advantage of it, or will at least consider it. Last question I have. The curing of the ballots, and especially witness signatures, witness addresses, things like that. Again, I think here in Chippewa County, you probably do it correctly. But what is the law, and are we going to go back to, if I may, the pre-COVID way of suggesting that if I didn't fill out my address, my ballot gets sent back and I have to get that corrected? Or will clerks continue to cure those ballots?
Well, whatever we cover now, we won't have to cover later, so it'll be shorter later, okay. So Megan can speak to that, but it wasn't because of COVID that was done. That decision was made before COVID by the Election Commission, and I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, thanks. So you're right. So when there's gray areas in the law, that's one of the bipartisan commission's tasks by law, is that they have to deliberate in public meeting what to do in those situations. And so when the law was passed about absentee voting and requiring a witness, the law says that each absentee ballot has to have a witness and a witness address. Now, in all the other places in the law, when the law says address, it says an address means, a street number, a street name, a municipality, and a zip code, or whatever the definition is. In this case, it just says the witness shall have an address. And so the commission, and this is before my time, had a meeting where they said, well, what does address mean for the purpose of a witness? And at that time, as part of their public meeting, they said a witness means that our witness address means it has to have a street number and a municipality. And if that information is there, or if the clerk can get that information from a reliable source, they're able to add that information to make that witness address complete. And so signatures, absolutely not. You cannot cure a signature. The only way to count an absentee ballot if it's missing a witness signature or the voter signature is both the voter and the witness have to actually come down to the polls, right, together and put that signature on there. You can never correct a witness signature, and if you can't get the witness signature and you can't get the voter signature, then that ballot cannot be counted. Back when the commission decided on that guidance about the address, they said, well, in a lot of instances, you're going to have a husband and a wife or spouses that are going to be, witnessing each other's ballots, right? And so let's say they forgot to put Wisconsin, or they forgot to say Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, and it just says 123 Main Street. But I'm looking at their address right here, and I know 123 Main Street is in Chippewa Falls. If you have that reliable information, then you're able to add that to the ballot, I said the wrong word, the envelope, the certificate envelope. You're able to add that missing address information for the witness. That was a decision they made, the 6 commissioners made. That was actually revisited again in 2020, and they made the same decision. They decided that that was the same guidance they were going to move forward with. Right now, there's actually active litigation. It's the Corman Act matter, where they're further considering that. There have been a couple of other cases where, again, we're still looking at that definition of what is an address. Right now, what the courts have said is that 2016 or 2017 memo where the commission defined what had to be in that witness address still stands. So that is, as of today, the letter of the law as decided by the courts post-COVID. Is the clerks can't necessarily add that missing information, but if it's missing some of those components for the witness address, then the ballot can still be counted. So I think some of it is still a little bit in flux, but that's where it stands today. And if there is further deliberation or decisions by the courts, that'll go back to the commission, and then they'll have to decide what do we want to send out in terms of guidance to the local clerks, letting them know about this court decision.
And honestly, the local clerks and myself, and I'm sure everyone up here, would prefer if we would get a strict definition of what an address is. Because here in Chippewa Falls, if someone writes 123 Main Street, comma, CF, comma, WI 54729, does that count? They put CF. They didn't write Chippewa Falls. Is that an address? Is that not an address? We've had all these questions from our clerks, and they're asking us, and it's like, again, what is the definition of the address? So if we had the clear address, it must have the street number, the street name, full city, full state, full zip code. And again, you're writing it on a line that's this long, but that's a different issue. So the more information the clerks can have, the better they can react to the voters and make sure things are done properly.
Okay, we're gonna try to wrap up and go to our next.
So, just a clarification.
Uh-huh.
You said on the witness address, you said street number and municipality. So just a street number, not the street name?
Street number, street name, municipality.
Okay.
I'm sorry, yep,
Thank you.
yep.
Okay, yeah. Well, full disclosure, I had many of those bills to clarify these things in my committee last session. And the governor vetoed them all. So, you know, so goes politics. So anyway, we're doing the best we can. I should say we, I'm not we anymore. They are doing the best they can with what they have to work with. We're gonna move on, and then we'll take a break for a little lunch. We're gonna talk about election day, and that's when our muni clerks really get busy along with all of their poll workers and chief inspectors. Election day at the state for May.
Yeah, so I can be pretty brief here. So election day at the state level is so exciting. I mean, if you can't tell, I love elections and I love doing whatever I can to support the local clerks, but that's really our goal. We don't have a huge staff. We have 34 full-time employees. That includes HR, accountants, lawyers, everything. We're a standalone independent agency. And every single one of us is on the phone. I can't sleep the night before election day. I'm sure you all know how that feels. And we come in bright and early, usually around 4 or 5 in the morning, and we start answering calls from the clerks about their getting set up. They're getting their polling places set up, and if they run into issues and need to talk through things, we're there to support them. And then all through election day and into the next morning, we do the same thing. So we answer voter calls, a lot of, you know, where's my polling place? We try to take as many of those questions off the plates of our local election officials in terms of helping people find their polling places, knowing what photo ID to bring with them, if they've moved and they gotta get registered to vote, helping them understand, you know, what the legal requirements are, what documents to bring with them, just helping people however we can. Sometimes there's, you know, issues that pop up at the polls. We can't intervene per se, but sometimes we're able to help add some information and assist, you know, a poll worker that's dealing with a tricky question. And then on election night, we're also available, like I said, well after the polls close into the next morning, answering those questions that might come up from poll workers and local election officials as they're doing their end of night processes, as they're doing their municipal boards of canvass, their absentee canvass. We support that as well. Wisconsin is kind of unique in that on election day, the state does not play any role in aggregating unofficial totals of contests. We're really unique in that way. Most other states at the state level, we'd be getting in data on election night, we'd be posting it on the website, you'd have returns that show on the website. We actually, under state law, can't do any of that, and the commission has looked at that issue multiple times. And so we're really just there to help answer questions where, you know, we don't have the starring role that day, that's for sure. but we answer a lot of questions. In 2020, in the weeks around the election, our office answered more than 1 million contacts, so those are emails and phone calls to our office. We're really, really proud of our customer service. When you call the Elections Commission, you always get a person, and it's always somebody like me, might even be me, that's very excited about elections and really just wants to help people navigate that process. So that's what we're doing on Election Day.
Okay, and at the county,
I'm sure I speak for Sue as well. We do not sleep like Megan the night before an election either. You're nervous, just worried, and then on election day, you honestly hope that it's super quiet. Because if you don't hear anything, that means everything is going well. So kind of like the state, for most of the part during the day, we're just there for questions. If things are happening with the machine or something's happening at a polling location, if it's a really big turnout or greater turnout than we expected, checking ballot quantities, again, making sure that the polling locations and our clerks have everything that they need. We're just kind of in that support role until the polls close, which I think is, and our next thing with the post election.
and if anyone else want to chime in? I know I have,
Yeah, our job really begins after the polls close on election day. That's when we receive the results and compile the reports that we post the unofficial election results. And yeah, so that can go pretty quick in Eau Claire County. Things are modemed in, so it can be really fast. Once in a while, we're waiting for one polling place in the city of Eau Claire. Waiting and waiting, no, it just depends. So, you know, it can go fast, it can go slow, it just, we never know. But that's kind of when our fun begins, is after the polls close, usually around 8:30 or so, when they're finishing up everything and running their totals, and we're transmitting. Our municipal clerks, they transmit their results and then they call us, and then we double check. We say, yes, we got your results. You had, 672 voters. Is that correct? That's correct. So that's what we check that night, just to make sure that the total number of voters matches what was transmitted to us from that municipality. The next day then, they bring in all of the rest of their items. They're required by 4 o'clock the next day to bring all of their ballots, all of their totals tapes, all of their supply, everything election related comes to the county, and that's where we store everything from the municipal clerks there at the county. So we start going through things, poll books, and doing, like we talked before, the voter credit, going through that information and preparing for Board of Canvas, which I think is something that's coming up.
yeah, we'll have that coming up. So as a county clerk, do you get interesting phone calls, this guy came into the polling place and he went home and his wife left and she didn't vote. And so he came back and he demanded to vote for her.
Oh.
I said, did you call the sheriff? Sheriff, should they have called you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. They didn't call him, they called me. After he voted. Yes. See, this is why you guys are so important. And it's why our poll workers and our clerks need to know they are available. Are you available on election day? Yeah?
24/7, 365.
All right. So never be afraid to call law enforcement when somebody does something that sure seems illegal.
I'd rather have people call us and us respond and find there was no wrongdoing, and than them not call us. And I tell people all the time that if you're bothered enough by it to pick the phone up and call us, we'll investigate it.
Okay. And disruption in the polling place is also illegal.
Correct.
And so we can also call law enforcement for that. And I think it's important for our poll workers to know that they have the support of law enforcement. And if you would like to speak to that, you may.
Oh, the only thing I would say is that on election night, the poll workers and the polling stations are a very high priority call. So, and we work closely with, in my case, the city clerk, to make sure that the officers have a refresher on what's allowed and what isn't allowed, who's going to be in charge of each polling station, and where they are and who's in charge.
The only disclaimer I would give is, well, they're law enforcement, I'm just a prosecutor, which means I do not investigate crimes. So some people call our office and say, I want to report whatever, and we'll say, thanks, but you need to go to Cadott or Stanley or whatever. We don't investigate at the district attorney's office. We allow it up to them to do their professional jobs, get us a packet of information where we can look through it and make a decision for that. So we may ask them to follow up investigation, but we don't independently investigate anything in the district attorney's office. So I understand that people don't always understand that, so we go out of our way to let them know where to report that and what to do. We don't just pass the buck, but sometimes, a lot of times people think, well, you're the prosecutor, so I just report stuff to you, and that's not the way that it happened.
Maybe we can go ahead and, as long as you want to wait, and then I will release you, if you would like to be released. So how many referrals did you get for voter fraud cases, in the 2020 election, give or take?
4.
Four?
I think so in the 6 years that I've been district attorney, because it's the district attorney himself, Jen or herself, tends to handle them directly. I think I've received 6. So there was, I think there was, not the last election, but the election before, I think that was the most. Otherwise, it's 1 or 2 at most an election. And I would say some of the stuff, luckily was caught by the local clerks. Like one of them was an individual whose wife had passed away, and he was like, well, she really wanted to vote in this election, so he requested an absentee ballot on her behalf, and the local clerks caught the fact that she had passed away, and so he didn't even get the absentee ballot. They went through the process of referring it to me, and so that was one. We had another one. So we have a couple that are clearly violations, where like felons are trying to vote. And unfortunately, sometimes things should be caught at the local polling place, but aren't, because, and I think it's changed now, because my daughter just registered for the last election. There was like a touch screen for her to register. Before it was paper. So there's like, if I remember right, there's like 4 questions you have to check yes to, and if you don't check yes to those 4 questions, then you shouldn't be voting. And so he didn't check the one about felon, so he didn't say that he wasn't. He just left that blank. And so the person should have caught it and said, well, if you're not answering this question, you shouldn't be voting. But it's still up to him to obviously to not be voting in at that at all. And we had one that was a high school kid that it was I think it was Cadott, but it was the Cadott school, and so he was like, he knew that was a polling place, so he voted there. And then he got home, and his mom was like, you don't vote there, we live outside the Cadott city limit, so we vote here. And he was like, okay, so then he went and voted there, thinking that it would be corrected in Cadott. And I actually learned something talking to Kathy, is that you can't correct, like once someone votes, you can't just pull that vote out, because there's no way to be like, that's Jim's vote, so we're taking that vote out of the machine. So once again, that probably should have been caught at the polling place, because generally cities have streets like Elm and Maple and whatever, and all of us that live in the county know that we have a 14-digit address depending on where our streets and the avenues line up. And so so most of it is, I would say it's half voter fraud and half, probably 2/3 voter fraud and 1/3 someone just not knowing what they're supposed to be doing. And he was an 18-year-old kid who didn't know like how the process goes, and no one noticed that to correct him, other than his mom. But his mom probably should have said, well, you shouldn't vote again, but, I mean, and I don't think it's Montone vote again, I think she just told, this is where the voting place was. But I guess I have a question for Nicholas, then, now that they have the touchscreen sort of way of, it's not touchscreen?
Only, like in Chippewa County, there's only 3 municipalities have that, that's part of the Badger Book system.
Okay.
The rest of them still use the paper registration forms, because you guys are in Lafayette, so
Yeah.
Lafayette is one that has,
So does it print it out for the municipality afterwards then?
it's, yeah.
Okay.
We don't have that stuff until then.
Yeah.
Because the only
And
reason I
then-
ask is I mean, being the prosecutor, I'm used to seeing the form, and of course, to speed it up for her, I'm like, fill out this, get it online, fill out this form, then you just give it to them, then you don't have to sit and do it, and you're there at the thing, and then she goes up there, and then all of a sudden I see her like, on screen doing something, I'm like, whatever, I mean, obviously can't manipulate her, pull her, and see what she's doing, so. So that was interesting, and because I was just wondering how that information would be relayed to like the prosecutor or someone voted wrong.
Well,
or
it
registered
wasn't
wrong.
Badger Book, it was the one that, so the one he's talking about was Cadott in Town of Seagull, and actually what happened, to elaborate a little bit more on that one with the 18-year-old, was the poll worker did not catch it again, he had put an address that was Town of Seagull. When the village clerk came back and she was reviewing the EDRs, she caught it on election day and she called us right away. And then we notified the sheriff's department right away because then we found out that he had voted, then it's Seagull too. So it was sort of caught on election day, but again, at that point, he'd already, was balloting through the.
So I feel sorry for poll workers, and poll workers, you know, they get trained. They only do this sometimes once or twice a year. Maybe if they're lucky and called every time, they could do it 4 times a year, but they kind of, you know, they make mistakes too, so that happens. In regard to referrals to the district attorney, so the clerk contacted the sheriff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was just debating as to whether she should have called Cadott or.
Well, we worked, actually, it was with Cadott because it originated in Cadott,
Yeah.
but then it was in the township, so then the sheriff's
Then the
department had
sheriff
to get
is
involved
involved.
because of the
Yeah.
other
Okay.
town. Yeah.
So anyway, so that's where you go, that's where I had to check out, you know, somebody went and got their mom out of, Whitehall and brought her here and registered her in the town of Wheaton and had her vote, but she had already voted in Whitehall in the nursing home. And so law enforcement had to go pay her a visit. I question whether it was an accident, but anyway, we have those sorts of things, they do happen. As far as the complaints filed with Wisconsin Election Commission on not just voter fraud type complaints. Now, it's my understanding that one complaint from 2020 was filed with the Wisconsin Election Commission, is that right?
Well, we certainly had complaints, I guess.
Official complaint.
Yes, of like mass fraud or fraudulent behavior.
Documented.
Correct, yeah. The commission, you know, gets complaints, and, you know, if somebody sees an election official, that's not, you know, fulfilling their duties as required by law, or if they witness voter fraud, there's an administrative process where they can file a complaint with the commission, and then the commission decides whether or not to make referrals to the appropriate district attorney. And so we did not have those from citizens. We do have, just a quick caveat on that, we do have a process where after the election, we get information from the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC, where it looks at voter participation in the state of Wisconsin, and then in the other states. And if somebody has voted both in Wisconsin and another state, then the commission reviews that information and makes referrals to the appropriate district attorney in both states. And so there were some of those referrals made, like there are every election. And after every election, the commission is required to publicly release a report of all the referrals and reports of voter fraud. So you can find all those on our website.
So, as many things as I've heard about all of the voter fraud everywhere, I don't think any official complaint with some of these assertions or accusations had ever been filed with what? Is that right?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Yes. So I found that rather interesting, that if all of these things that we've heard over the last 2+ years, 3 years, about, you know, people stuffing, the drop boxes and all of this. No one has actually filed, Mr. Douglas Frank or his associates have not actually filed a complaint with the Wisconsin Election Commission on voter fraud. So when we listen to all of these things said, and the evidence isn't there to file an official complaint, then I think we need to step back and say to ourselves, self, I don't think I should listen to this person. They don't have the evidence. So I think we need to also recognize that we have a lot of checks and balances in place, and if we have a question about elections, we go to the people who actually run the elections. And Mike, in defense of the southern part of the state, you're gonna find this interesting, so I have to look at you.
I think I might.
Madison knows the law, and they know how to work it within the law. So the democracy in the heart, but technically within the law. I suggest to any election officials who want to get creative, so the sheriff or the police officers don't get called, don't be creative. Just do it the way we've always done it before, and then people will question the integrity of the election. Most of those people in Dane County, I would say the average is a master's degree, don't you think? Maybe even PhD. They're very smart, and they know how to work it. So I would say that actual voter fraud in Dane County is probably very minimal. As far as Milwaukee is concerned, I went on a presidential election and observed 6 polling places in the inner city, because I wanted to see just what they were doing and how they were doing it, because I too have heard our county's great, our city's great, but that Milwaukee's gotta be bad. They have friends, neighbors, relatives that work the polls too. Just like you, just like me. They're like us for the most part. Now they have massive numbers of ballots, massive numbers of absentee ballots that come in throughout the day. Now whether they do it exactly properly or not is maybe up for question, but I don't know that there's any clear evidence that the people in Milwaukee don't follow election procedures. And I observed a young man that says they won't take this this document from my landlord as proof of residence. Why don't you think they should take this? And I looked at it. I said, it's not signed, it's not a legal document. They rejected him, so that was a good sign. They also had some people there that came from, Pastor Wade, what's the youth drug and alcohol organization?
Teen Challenge.
Teen Challenge. They had people there from Teen Challenge wanted to vote. They didn't have proof of residency. They've been at Teen Challenge. Teen Challenge is a year-long program, so they were there plenty, long enough. They sent them back to get documentations of proof of residence. So in my experience, observing elections at the 6 polling places in Milwaukee, there was a very drunk lady there that should have not voted at all, and she didn't know where to vote. I mean, there were some interesting things that occurred. But I think we have to step back and realize that, we also have to give them a little credit, the Democrats and Republicans in Milwaukee, for following the proper procedures unless proven otherwise. And there might be some cases. But I've heard this over and over again. I know we run our elections really, really well in our municipality, but I don't know about La Crosse. I don't know about that city of Eau Claire. I don't know about that Milwaukee. And I just think that's an unfair assertion. Milwaukee has massive numbers of polling places, huge numbers of people to run an election, and I would venture to guess they make more errors. But if you want to get away with really bad things in that polling place, that means that numerous people around you have to be in cahoots with you. And so whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you're gonna jeopardize your reputation, prison, and a fine, I don't care, money means a lot to me. You're gonna jeopardize all of that to cheat for a few votes. You gotta really think that through a lot. And I think it's time for a drink, not an actual alcoholic drink, but and something to eat. So let's take a break.
And you're watching our Keep Our Republic election class. We're going to keep the audio stream running. We are going to disconnect the audio here for a bit, but we will keep the audio stream running.
dear friend of mine who has a hearing aid and his buzzes every now and then too. So off to Election Day, city, town, and village, where all the action happens, and all the votes are cast. Take it away, Nicholas.
So on election day, it depends upon the municipality. In ours, because we're such a large municipality, the chief inspectors do a lot of the actual work at the polling place. And I'm more of going around supporting the chief inspectors. In other municipalities, I think the clerks can be a little bit more involved in the polling place. So I mentioned earlier that we test all of the machines, and then we have our machine testers sign that the machines they've been correctly tested, the results are correct. They also sign that the tamper evidence seals we put on the machine sign the same piece of information. Those tamper evidence seal numbers go back with me, and I put all that information into the inspector statements, which is a really important document for the polling places. So on election day, the chief inspectors, they have their inspector statement. They'll have the machine numbers, the numbers that are on the programming information that the county gave us. They'll have the numbers that are on the temporary seals. So one of the first things that they do is they check to make sure that all the numbers match, right out of the gates. Because otherwise, if we accidentally gave them the wrong machine, which has happened, we're humans, we can switch them, of course. But that way they know they have the right machine with the right information, they match everything up, it's sealed, so they have to check to make sure that it's properly sealed to begin with. And then they open up the polls and get the machine running. As far as their morning activities, it's all about setting up the polling place. And some of our polling places are nice, and they let us set up mostly ahead of time. And then on election day, it's just getting all of the security information set up. Other polling places, they have to set up everything on the day of the election in the morning, so they get there at 5 in the morning and start working right away. And then, I'm not going to go exactly in the order that you have on here, but
Do whatever you want.
when they turn on the machine will print that report saying that there are no votes on the machine. And it'll have all the information about the machine on there as well. The chief inspectors and usually a couple other poll workers, they look at that zero report, they look at the machine and make sure that it says that there are no ballots. They check the tapes and they all sign saying there's no votes on the machine. And part of that will go to the county clerk at the end of the day. So that will be the zero totals report. Next question. The ballots, we lock our ballots in the voting machines and secure them when we drop them off. So we have the paper custody trail of all of the machines being sealed, put the ballots in it, and then the chief inspectors break open the seals and they write down the seal number on there so that we could check it if we needed to. All that information is double checked and put on the inspector statement. The inspector statement is probably the most important document on election day because that's where all of the secure information goes and that's where any incident that happens goes. So the chief inspectors will fill out the inspector statement throughout the day and they'll write boring things like we open the polls at 7 a.m. and we closed it at 8 p.m. But then they'll write other things like people dropped off ballots. They'll write down if there was an issue, like someone is trying to put the ballot in the machine and it jammed and they didn't see the thank you for voting screen popped up. So there's confusion. So they write down all that kind of information in the inspector statements. And throughout the day, the ballots are kept usually with 2 poll workers on either side. As people come to vote, the poll workers will have them put their information in the poll book, and they're essentially kind of the security of the ballots throughout the day. If there's extra ballots, those will be with the chief inspectors, usually at a different table in a different area to make sure that no one can get to the ballots throughout the day. Then voter registration. So we do get quite a few voter
I just wanted to, Nicholas, show them, what a inspector statement looks like. This is where, the inspectors sign and verify all of the information. And that's one thing that we always, hammered into the poll worker's head. Document, document, document. It didn't happen if you didn't put it on the inspector statement, so that's very important.
And ours looks just a little bit different than that one, because we have the workers, they'll take the tamper evidence seal and they'll stick it right to the inspector statements and things like that. And then we make a copy of it for our use for entering information, and then the original copy goes to the county clerk. So all that information, we try to keep it as well documented as possible. We say the same thing, document. For voter registrations, some of our poll sites get a lot of registrations, like the university. The university can suddenly turn out 1,000 registrations pretty quickly. So voter registration, similar process to if you were to try to register yourself, except it's being done on election day at the polling place. And voters come in, we have a lot of documentation on the tables, around signs showing these are the right types of information that you can give us. These are the expiration dates, because some of the different types of proof of residency come with different expiration dates and different sets of rules, just to make things confusing for our poll workers and add more excitement to the day. So we have a lot of that information laid out already for the poll workers, so they can just look if there's anything that they're not sure about. They'll ask their chief inspectors. Their chief inspectors will usually call me, and if I don't know, I will check the election day manual, or I'll call Megan's colleagues, and they're usually pretty quick at answering most of those questions. But for voter
Nicholas, I want to point out where the, up top here, qualifications, the very top of the registration form, when you register to vote, you are a United States citizen, you have resided in the address for at least 10 days, you'll be 18 years of age or before election day, and you are not currently a felon. Now, a lot of people think that a one-time a felon, always a felon. You don't mind if I clarify this, do you? No. Once a felon, always a felon, that is not the case. If you've been charged with felony and you have 6 years in prison and 2 years of probation or parole, your entire sentence is then 8 years, right? So your probation, if you're on probation or parole, then you're still a felon as far as voting purposes. And once you've completed that, then, and only then, can you register to vote. Because now you've completed your full sentence and you have paid your debt to society. I had a gentleman call me and ask me about this, and he really wanted to vote, but he wanted to express his concern about something on the ballot, but he couldn't vote because he was a felon. And I said, really? I said, well, when were you charged for a felony? He said, 30 years ago. I said, you paid your debt? Yeah. I said, oh, you've been able to vote ever since, that whole time. And he started to cry. So it's sad, a lot of people don't know it, not even the felon. Okay, go ahead.
There's actually a small mistake on this, because you have the 10-day one, 10 consecutive days, it's 28 now.
Oh,
Again, we all
good
make-
catch, good catch, Nicholas.
But that's the one that keeps bouncing back and forth, so we never, you always got it. It might be 10 next year.
28 or 10 days prior to election.
So, yeah, our poll workers will, the voters come in, they'll fill out this form with the poll workers. The poll workers will let them fill it out, and they'll double check it, make sure everything is as correct as possible. Then the voter will show them their proof of residency documents, and the poll workers will go through, check, there's a whole bunch of information about that. This is one of the documents we give our poll workers so they can see the different types of expiration dates for each type of proof of residency. And of course, the proof of ID information, because those are also kind of different and idiosyncratic. So once the voter registers, then they can go to the poll book table and they sign the supplemental, not supplemental, the election day registration supplemental part of the poll book. And again, a copy of that goes to the county, part of that goes to us. Then they're able to vote, processing absentee ballots. We deliver the absentee ballots to the polling place, usually in the morning. And we have, in our case, 2 teams of delivery folks. We have most of whom are retired city employees from the police department. And they'll come and they'll deliver all the ballots. Again, there's a whole chain of custody series of documentation for them to fill out that the chief inspectors have to fill out the corresponding copy of and get back to us at the end of the day to make sure that everything was delivered on time to the right person at the right place. And then throughout the day, they can process absentee ballots. And we do get quite a number of them. So a lot of our polling places will have kind of a dedicated team to just process absentee ballots, and they'll work on it. The process is, I find it kind of mind-numbing, but some people are really enthusiastic about it. But it is, it's a constant double checking against the poll book, absentee logs, and any other information that we give to them. And they do that all throughout the day. And they announce this is a ballot for such and such person, out loud so everybody can hear it, and if there's any objections, it could be challenged. Ms. Matt?
I think you're okay. Here's an example of some of the photo IDs that are used in our voter identification process. So military IDs, student IDs that have an expiration date, Wisconsin identification. So I think that's self-explanatory.
Yeah, all that information is, we put lots of copies of that in the polling place, both for the voters and for the poll workers, because it's too much to just remember offhand. Then as on election day, each voter has to, when they go up to the poll book, again, we have 2 copies. So one that they'll get up there and they'll state their name and address, they'll show their photo ID, and they'll sign the poll book. And then the poll workers double check that they sign in the right spot. So a lot of people will get confused because it's upside down. And then they'll give them a voter number, and the voter number information will go into the second poll book too. That way we can check at the end of the night or after the election and see that this person voted and they had this voter number, and it's in both poll books. It's one of our ways of double checking to make sure that the voter information is correct.
Is that that voter number there, is that unique to each and every voter?
Yeah.
Is it always the same?
It is unique to each voter. Some places, we used to use raffle tickets, and they just kind of tear off the raffle ticket.
No, I meant this
Oh, the voter registration number of the poll
one.
book?
Yeah,
Yeah, I believe that's unique to every person.
yeah, I don't know if we're gonna get into that, but I want, there was some assertion made back when I was in the legislature about that number and various numbers, you know, and so, but they're not the same and they can't be confused, and you only get it, it's not, if somebody gets a hold of your number, they can't vote for you. I think that was one of the concerns. You know, that number is just a number for you, but that doesn't mean anyone can vote for you with that number.
Yeah. Because they still have to do the state name, address, show the photo ID, and sign the poll book. You want me to go into the photo IDs or? That's it?
No, we'll go on to processing absentee ballots, and people are really it's getting late.
Okay, so, like I said, the processing absentee ballots part, our poll workers have done an excellent job and have been, you know, when when we started getting thousands of them, you know, it was really difficult. Now they've really worked it out, and they can go through quite a number of absentee ballots really quickly. So this happens at each polling place, and our poll workers will work in teams, again, Democrat and Republican, and they'll go through, they have the absentee log. The absentee log has all the information about the ballot, when it was sent, when it was received. So if you turn in your ballot before the election, when we scan it, it goes into WisVote. When we print up the absentee log, it'll say the date that it was returned. If there's no date, that means the person hasn't returned it. So when people come to the polling place and they bring their ballots and drop them off there, then they'll write the dates in there to make sure that the information is accurately put into WisVote after the election. So absentee log has all the information, and they go through one by one. They check the ineligible voter list for each voter. They check the poll book and make sure that everything is correct. They check the voter certification on the envelope, and they go through them. And then when they open them, a lot of times they'll kind of, after they've gotten a group of them checked and make sure everything is correct, and they open them up, they'll kind of mix up the ballots. That way they don't know, they can't identify a ballot with an envelope. Just to make some of them feel comfortable. I think they used to do that a lot. So that way they can't identify a individual voter's ballot. And then they put them in the machines. The machine counts it. That information is put in the poll books as well. So it's in the absentee logs, it's in the poll books. The numbers are written on the absentee envelope. They're written on the absentee log, and it's written in the poll book. And since there's 2 copies of the poll book and 2 copies of the absentee log, they write that number down a lot for each voter, so that there's multiple versions, multiple copies. So if there's any issue that we run into, I can email Sue and say, Sue, on page 75 of the poll book, we can't read the number. Can you send us your copy of it? And she can send us a copy. So, yeah, and like I said, if the person's dead, we'll put their obituary right on their absentee envelope and staple it to it. So that way they know to reject that ballot at the polling place. Same thing if they were a felon, we put their felon information on there. Yeah, and they can remake them if there's certain problems. But usually they spilled coffee on it at some point, and there's a big coffee stain on it, and the machine rejects it. And then they work as a group, again, usually Democrat and Republican. Oftentimes 3 or 4 people will go through and they'll remake the ballot. They'll check, the remade ballot goes into a separate, goes into the machine, the original goes into an envelope that Sue gets at the end of the election, and they're numbered. That way you can match the remade envelope with the original, just to double check if you needed to after the election.
So we heard a lot of times that people got more than one ballot in 2020. And I still have people telling me they got more than one ballot. And I think we all came to the conclusion, that actually happened in Eagle Point, by the way, that she did get 2 ballots. I checked it out. So she saved it. So I knew she had too many ballots. But the other ones were actually requests, as far as we can tell, were requests for absentee ballot. Because if you got an absentee ballot in the mail, you would have this big old certificate envelope with it to return the ballot. And you can't mistake absentee ballot. But I told this individual, and I stopped, Lisa helped me, we determined that in fact she did get, there was different writing, and it was probably a deputy clerk and a municipal clerk. So if by chance she was a shyster and she was going to turn in both ballots that got sent to her, what would be the bells and whistles that would go off for you?
A lot of things, primarily when they checked the absentee ballot block, they find it right away, especially if they'd already processed the previous envelope. It's already going to have a number attached to it, so we would catch it right away then. And if they end up with 2, even if it hasn't been processed at that point, then as we're going through it, they're usually alphabetizing them. So when they alphabetize them, they'll say, we got 2 ballots for the same person. If it's a case where they bring one in right at the end of the night, again, they'd probably find it from the previous numbers on there. So there's a lot of ways that they could find it right away. It also, if the person comes in and they try to vote, the absentee ballot information would be in the poll book. So if they go up to the poll book table, they'll have the absentee ballot number in there. That way the poll worker will catch it right away then too. So there's a lot of ways to catch it. You could catch it after the fact too, but just by going through the WISPO credit process, but there's a lot of ways to catch something like that. That's easy.
The same person cannot be reported as have voting twice. Just can't happen that way. Yes.
You may have just answered that, but I was curious from previously when you said, well, there was the young kid who voted in both places, and then you also said, well, we can't just pull their ballot. So I didn't hear the end of that story of, well, yeah, you voted in 2 places, it just happened, or is that where the double check actually comes into play?
Okay.
So he voted twice, and it was caught after, well, it was caught sort of that day, but then after the fact. So then it would be up to the Board of Canvass, which we'll get to decide, all right, so you have one ballot more than you have voters. So the Board of Canvass then has that opportunity to say that we're going to do what's called a drawdown, and what they would have to do then is open up the ballot bag, randomly pull the ballot out, and you're gonna subtract those totals, or those votes from your totals. It's rare in a situation like that where your Board of Canvass is gonna feel comfortable making that decision.
It's usually only if you can't explain it, right? If you can't explain it and then you use the drawdown process, so I think you're right, they're pretty rare. And, you know, almost everything gets caught before election day, on election day, like has been described, but after election day, as we'll talk about, certifying elections takes like 30 days for a statewide contest because of all the checks that are continuing to happen. And so let's say somebody did, you know, vote in 2 separate jurisdictions, it didn't get caught on election day. When the clerks go into WISVote and they go to attribute votes to people that have signed the poll book, the first clerk that puts in that voter has participated, they're gonna, you know, be able to enter that information, and then when the second one goes to put that in, they're gonna have an issue, right? And it's gonna pop up and say, well, this person already voted, you can't put in this additional information. And so at that point is when that referral to the district attorney would happen, and all the information about those 2 records would be sent to them, and we'd cooperate however we could to give them everything in the statewide database.
So if I'm understanding it right, the drawdown process isn't utilized a lot because it's typically caught before that?
Yeah, and if it's not, there is a thorough recount process that may find something that may not have been caught, and that's when the lawyers are all hovered during a recount process. So if it's close, if it's a close election, requires a recount, that those poll books and ballots and envelopes and everything are scrutinized to the hilt, and then you would do a drawdown. The bad part of that is, I was talking to the district attorney, is we can't tell whose ballot we're drawing down. So you can draw a ballot that has nothing to do with how the person actually voted.
Yeah.
Which is why you want to avoid mistakes, because a drawdown, your vote is anonymous. We don't know, you know, we'll know which ones are absentee, right? But we don't know how the people voted. They make, you know, extra effort not to determine how someone voted, and they're not marked. They don't, that number, that specific number isn't on your ballot because, you know, it's an anonymous vote.
One nice thing with that too is the poll workers initial ballot, all poll workers have to. So if someone were to try to put a ballot from somewhere else in the machine, you would be able to spot it because it wouldn't be initialed by the poll workers who were working. So that would be one way of saying, oh, this ballot doesn't, this would be the ballot that we're going to draw one out, this would be the one to draw out. So that's one of the nice things about the initialing system, even though it's kind of cumbersome, especially if you have a lot of ballots. provides that, one of the last, you know, safeguards on the ballots.
And just to avoid any confusion, you said, well, the poll book, but the poll book, as Megan mentioned, they're all separate. It's not like it's a universal poll book, so Cadott and the town of Seagull would have their own poll book. So they between each other would have no mechanism to know, just from the poll book that someone,
Yeah.
they don't cross-reference between, amongst each other. It was
And
just
with
a-
that specific incident, he was a brand new voter, so he was registering same day. Wisconsin allows for same day registration, where some other states, you can't register for, you know, I think they cut it off 30 days before the election or whatever it is. Where Wisconsin allows that same day registration, so that's where that happened, where he could vote then.
So in that instance, was there a drawdown for that individual? Or is that?
I don't recall, but I would guess probably not, because what they look at too, the Board of Canvas will look at is, if we subtracted one vote from any of these races, would it make a difference? Would it change the outcome of the election?
Or if there's a recount.
Or if there was, yeah.
And even in that case, if it wasn't caught on election day, you'd catch it and was vote after the election.
Before it's certified.
So now we're gonna move on, can I move on?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We're gonna talk about Wisconsin election observers. Who wants to take that? I know I do have an experience with that. Go ahead. Take it away.
I can just, kick it off. So, election observers in Wisconsin are allowed at polling places. Like we'll talk about, there's certain criteria. In a lot of other states, interestingly, to be an observer, you have to either have trained with one of the parties and have them designate you, or you have to be a resident of that jurisdiction. In Wisconsin, our law does not have any of those restrictions. Anybody can observe at any polling place that they would like to. And so we do have a very robust election observer program. Observers are a very important part of the election process. And then before I turn it over, one thing I'll just put in a plug for the commission, the 6-member bipartisan commission, is right now they're working on updating an administrative rule as it pertains to election observers. So again, getting back to those places where there aren't clear definitions in the law, that's where an administrative rule comes into place, and the commission can seek to clarify some aspects of the law. And in this case, they've actually formed a committee that's made up of all sorts of political parties, partisan organizations, voter advocacy groups, all sorts of people across the political spectrum. And they've been working on, as part of a committee together, on giving advice to the commission on places where the observer law needs some clarity. And it's been a really cool thing to watch, as all these folks that have very different, political viewpoints, life experiences, work through this together in a productive way. And so you might have seen some of the press around that in the last few weeks. It's been a pretty cool process. And my hope is that this group will really have some great feedback for the commission to consider, and that headed into 2024, we'll be able to pass get an administrative rule approved that will help to give even more clarity around some of the aspects of observing.
And on the clerk side of things, we do get observers, especially at the big elections. Sometimes we'll have multiple observers from multiple parties, and they'll come in, and again, there's this checklist that they have to follow. Primarily, the most important thing is that they sit and they watch and they don't interrupt the process. That's the real takeaway. And when they do, the chief inspector, who's like the supervisor of the polling place, they'll tell them that they may need to leave if they're causing a problem. And the observers, again, they'll wear a badge that says observer. There's little spots where we'll have them sit and they can sit and watch. It's open to anybody, and we'll get people who observe for an hour, and then they get bored and kind of wander off. And we'll get people who show up as soon as the polls open, and they'll stay all the way after the polls close and all the way through the reconciliation process. and wait until people are like packing up their cars to leave before they. So we do get quite a few observers, and they come from all over the place sometimes. We'll have observers who come from Madison and things like that. And they're really an important part of the process.
So we're not to engage the voters.
They don't talk to their voters. They really shouldn't even talk to the poll workers, just the chief inspector. And they're not supposed to even be on their phones as far as making voice phone calls, recording things, and they can't wear their campaign gear, so they can't do any sort of electioneering type of behavior, and they can't view any of the confidential information that might be in a poll book. And for the most part, then it's just they sit in their taped out box, and they get to watch the different important parts of the process.
So my concern often is, there seems to be sort of an adversary relationship between poll workers and observers in some instances. And it really shouldn't be that way. Every observer has the right to observe the electoral process. And the poll workers need not worry about that they're there watching. I think they get defensive or something, that they're watching them. Well, they probably are watching them, but they're also more often than not checking out who's showed up to vote and who you have to call that hasn't been there by 3 p.m. in order to get them to the polls. And that's usually what they're trying to do. So I got a phone call. How many clerks get the phone call?
Yeah.
So, it's the municipal clerk's duty and responsibility, they call the county clerk, that the town chairman put the poll watchers back in the corner about 25 feet, and they could not see or hear. So then somebody moved them up halfway, where they still couldn't see or hear. And so I jumped in my car and I went to visit the chief inspector, and I said, you are responsible for this polling place. You make the decision. Get the town chairman out of the polling place. And so they have no business being in there and running the show, not a mayor, not a village president, nobody. It's the clerk's duty and poll workers and chief inspectors, right? We all agree on that. Election night, yes.
So if an observer sees something questionable, what are you supposed to do?
You go to the chief inspector and you tell the chief inspector what you're seeing that is bothering you. And they should have a conversation with you as to whether that is abnormal, normal, or whether you want to file a complaint. Anything
Yeah,
else?
people call, they'll call the city clerk's office as well. We do take some of those, and sometimes it's something simple. We have a polling place next to private property, and there's a sign on the private property, and that's really big, and people will say, that's electioneering, but no, it's actually just, it's not private property, and it's different. So we do take phone call complaints like that. People will call, but really the first person and the most important person to talk to is the chief inspector.
And if no satisfaction, you can reach out to law enforcement?
Yeah, you can call us, you can call the election commission. We'll occasionally get people who call the election commission, and then they call me, and then I call the chief inspector. But usually those are almost always just a case of a misunderstanding. Someone doesn't quite understand a rule, and they're upset about something, and they'll call the election commission, and they'll call me. So, but if it's something really big, yeah, you could call law enforcement, of course.
We've had people call, like Representative Summerfield, and then he's called me directly saying, I heard this about a polling location, I go check it out. I mean, I think as long as you have a true concern, contact somebody, and we'll figure it out and investigate it, because, again, none of us up here want, if anything goes wrong on election day, I don't want my name in the paper the next day. My goal is to make sure that everyone that is legally able to vote gets to vote, and that everything runs as smoothly as possible. So we don't want those concerns, and I would rather you call us on election day instead of, like Kathy says, we hear something 2 months later, oh, well, this happened. I can't do anything 2 months months later. I need to know that day that it's happening.
I agree. It needs to be dealt with at that time.
Real quick, are observers allowed to record at all? Phone or audio? I mean, video?
We've been all over the board on that too, haven't we?
Yeah, and it's really at the discretion of the chief inspector of the polling place, but, you know, ultimately you can't interfere with the voting process. And so if a voter felt that that was, you know, intimidating, or that that was something that, you know, made them feel uncomfortable voting, then certainly they wouldn't be allowed to. Now, the best example of something that happens that's probably a legitimate process is some observers, when it's allowed and they're not causing a disruption, they might be taking photos of things like, you know, the observer log, or even like what voters have already signed in and signed the poll book, and sending it back to, you know, the group that they're working with. The observer should work with the chief inspector and should work with the poll workers to find those times when it's not going to interfere and intimidate the voters.
So is that what the commission is looking at?
Exactly, that's exactly it. Yep, they're
Right.
looking at all that,
Great.
plus the, you know, the 3 to 8 foot rule. You know, what does that mean? What should an observer be able to see, right? So if somebody says, nope, you've got to be 8 feet back, okay, you're 8 feet back, but do you still have the right to be able to see certain things? And those are the details that that committee is going to be working through.
Great.
And as far as recording in the polling places, we have 4 confidential voters. Those are people who are, their life is in danger, and they're able to have slightly different rules for voting, so that people can't figure out where they live. So we wouldn't want people recording in a polling place with somebody who's like, you know, their life is in danger if they go to vote.
And that's a small, like, we only have, in all of Trumbull County, we have 1 confidential voter. I mean, it's very rare.
So there was somebody with a restraining order or something, you know, and they don't want the perpetrator to find out where they live. So they go through different process through the sheriff's department, right? Or the police department?
But I
Well, but it ultimately comes to us, and we enter all the information.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it goes through the Department of Justice, and then they bring kind of a whole package of documents, and we have to, a special way of registering them.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna try to move this along.
Yep.
Okay, verify all absentee ballots, election night activity.
Okay, yeah, so at
You
the,
can skip around if you want.
Yeah.
Read really fast.
really at the end of the night, the big ones are, once all the voters who are online at 8 o'clock have voted, they'll close the polls, on the machine. The machine starts to tabulate everything that's inside of it. And then the poll workers have to go through and have to check all the voter numbers and signatures match in all the poll books, which can be a time-consuming process on their part. The chief inspectors take all the voter statistics data and they put it in the inspector statements. And once the machine is done tabulating, they modem the results to the county clerk for being posted on their website. And then they bring everything back to us, and then we have a whole nother checklist of things where this goes to the county, this goes to the school board, this stays with us, that we have to go through for each polling place. And as we go through that process of separating everything out, entering any provisional ballots that we might get into this vote, putting it on our website, and all those fun things, then I usually go to sleep at some point. Usually around 3 in the morning, and then the next day bring some of the information, bring all of the county's information to the county, and then we go through the process of sorting through what we have. And we do our municipal board of canvass on the Friday after the election because we have too much stuff to go through on election night.
So on election night at the county, Megan said they don't put all of the election results together at the state level. So the media, AP usually, does all the tabulating through the county website. So take it.
So in Chippewa County, our results are not modem to us, we have different equipment, so each clerk then has to call us with their results. And then, so 2 of us are answering the phones, taking the results, and another person then is doing the data entry, so we can get those unofficial results posted on the website as quickly as possible. And then, basically, it's just making sure we can hear from all the municipalities, and hopefully we don't have to call the sheriff because someone forgot to call us and they've decided to go home or go somewhere else late at night. But yeah, I mean, our rolls were pretty low-key that night, so it's kind of a lot of waiting and what's funny, you'll think this is interesting, I will get home and my husband will ask me like who won a certain race, and I'll be like, I didn't even know, like I'm so focused on just making sure we get all the information, entering it, that I'm like, I didn't even look to see.
Oh, yeah. I was saying,
Yeah.
I won't even know who won the election.
Oh, yeah, I was on Good Morning America once, and they said who won in Wisconsin, I'm like, you know what, I have no idea, because you're so focused on just the details of it, so.
So when we talk about modeming, we're going to hold that conversation off until we get to, well, you're not gonna talk about it because you're clear ballot.
Yeah, what I would just say for our section, and I'll get to it in a moment, is that our system doesn't have that capability. We don't have modems in our system, so the data has to be called in or driven in. But I'll get to all that in a minute.
Okay, so, Megan, I'll just touch on this to save you a little bit, but, and you can chime in. So modems are like a fax machine. Is that fair?
Modems are, yes, like you could send information through a phone call, through an email, through, something like a Dropbox. Modems are a way to send unofficial, never official, unofficial results, information from point A to point B.
Right, and it's instantaneous, so you can possibly hack into it, because it's like, boom, that information is there. So it's like, sending a fax or making a phone call, and then you hang up right away. So and they are not attached to the internet. Can most of the machines, can I attack it through a Wi-Fi system?
Our modems go through a dedicated line through Verizon, so that there's nothing else on that line, no one else is in there.
Right, and it's like a phone line though. It's not like internet, fiber optic.
It's encrypted, like an
Yeah.
ETF.
Yes.
Yep.
So when we hear that the electronic voting equipment is attached to the internet, it's been hooked up to the internet, and it can be hacked, and things can be flipped, and all of that, that is absolutely false. It cannot be. It's like saying the votes can be flipped in the middle of the day after they've all been programmed, they've all been certified, they've all been tested. It can't happen. So, can somebody hack into the electronic equipment? Yeah. You can have some MIT IT guy tear it apart and pull it back together and change things if they want, but they have to have access. They have a way to see them. There's all sorts of things that they would have to do to be able to make that work. And they don't have that access. They don't have that capability on any of our electronic equipment. So, all of those things that were said about the electronic equipment is absolutely positively false. And that's the only best way I can say it. Moving on? All right.
Oh, I did want to add one thing. They are incredibly accurate.
Oh, yes, hand counting is credibly inaccurate. Period.
You should see a machine audit after an election. It's terrible. All we're doing is erasing things and recounting things. And that's usually, we've had rest, we've got a nice cup of coffee, it's not 19 hours of an election day, and then sitting there trying to make tallies on a machine. Machines are incredibly accurate and catch basically any mistake you make.
Good point, very good point. They are 99.999% accurate. The only reason why we found an error on one is when there's a straggle mark, or an eraser, or some other mark. Isn't that what you found? It's usually human error?
Yeah, the machine will just like usually, yeah, It's always human error, but if there's like a scratch mark on it, the machine will reject it until there's a mistake on it. And if it's an absentee ballot, you know, then they'll have to go through the remake process. But at the polling site, they just have them vote a second.
Okay. Terry?
So, the electronic machines that we have in Wisconsin are the same that are being used in other states.
Correct.
So what you said is true for other states as well.
Absolutely.
I'm so tired of individuals who are saying the only way we were going to have fair elections is get rid of the electronic equipment. But you're telling me that's not true.
It's not true. It would take days. Okay, one of the problems we have in Pennsylvania right now, I digress. My organization is involved in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. They don't count absentee ballots until after the polls close. And they take the ballots up to a week after the election, as long as it's postmarked, I believe. So they're counting ballots in Pennsylvania for a week straight. And so does that call into question your electoral system? Absolutely it does. And so Pennsylvania needs to get with the program and you know, come into the 21st century in regard to their electoral system. But we have a central count system. So all of this is done on election day, but in large cities, they have a central count system, Waukesha, Milwaukee, some of the others. And the same people are at those central count locations, Democrats and Republicans, friends and neighbors, and election officials and poll workers and all of that are certified. Those are the people there going through the same process they went through when you walked into the polling place, checking the name off, that they requested an absentee ballot, and everything is signed and all of that. But they do that at the central count location because they don't have time in those large cities to actually execute the absentee ballots during the election day. And so, but we start right away when the polls open, the absentee vote count also starts. And even though in large cities, they're still bringing in the ballots that came in up until 8 p.m. on election night, they have to count those ballots. So people who dropped off their ballots on election day at the clerk's office or whatever, the clerk has to get them all together and get them to the count location. And they can get those, however long it takes to get those ballots to the counting location, and it might take, you know, a couple hours in Milwaukee, or several hours, before they get them all gathered up and over to the central count location. So the big dump of voters and whatever, and I use this analogy. When I ran for the state assembly, I left, Lisa Merrill did all my stuff. I stayed out and answered phones because I was on the ballot. And I got to Fannie Hill where all the Republicans were gathered, and I believe I was up 900 or 1,000 votes. And everybody applauded. Yay! I said, oh, Claire's not in. A Republican will lose a lot of votes once Eau Claire comes in, and your lead had better be big enough to offset the Democrat voters in the city of Eau Claire. And I did by 87. 87 votes. So if Donald Trump lost his lead in Milwaukee at 3 o'clock in the morning, that very much makes sense because Milwaukee votes Democrat in high percentages. And so you have to have a big enough lead in all of the other parts of Wisconsin in order to offset the Democrat votes in Milwaukee or Mass.
That same election, we had a misunderstanding with one of our townships where they thought they could not process the absentee ballots until polls closed. So they did not start running their absentee ballots until 8 o'clock.
That's what happened.
So everybody else, we had everybody else's results for the whole county, probably by midnight at the very latest, because it was a presidential election. We were here till 3:30 in the morning, waiting for that township to finish running those absentee ballots. So you can see even in Chippewa County on that small scale, that could have skewed, you know what I mean, could have flipped some results depending on how that township voted, because we didn't post those results till 3:30 in the morning, because we were waiting for them to finish. So you can see it happens everywhere.
It does,
can happen.
it does. You just gotta have a big enough vote. And, you know, the other way too, if you're running Democrat and you're waiting for Waukesha to come in, you gotta have a pretty good lead.
Kathy, real quick.
Yes.
Did you know that was happening in the township? Is that why you knew right away that that was the case?
So I did not know right away. Around 10 o'clock, for some reason, I don't know, we had called out there for something else and then realized that's what they were doing. And actually, we had a clear ballot rep here that day, and we thought they were just couldn't keep up with it or whatever. So we actually were taking another tabulator. We had a spare. I was gonna take that out there to see if we could help them. But it was just like Nick said, just the process of how you have to do the absentees by announcing it, opening it, going through all the stuff. Bringing them a second tabulator was not gonna help. So we just knew, and I think I sent one person home in my office. Actually, she ended up having COVID. So then, two of us just sat there waiting. I'm not gonna say I didn't put my head on my desk at one point because that's a long day, but we knew, but there was nothing at that point we could do.
And I guess I would just encourage not only you guys, but all the clerks to try to be as upfront with the media about what's going on and why that is, because that's when you really begin to foster what's going on. You know, that's when the conspiracies start to jump in your head. We had the same thing in La Crosse County. We had one municipality that didn't report until several hours after, and we're like, what is going on? Nobody knew. So the sooner that the sooner you.
And I agree with you, but my figuring out how to say this nicely. Here in Chippewa County, sometimes the media ignores us. What I can say, and we have some county board supervisors here, we used to have 2 or 3 media at every single county board meeting. We have 0 now. I mean, I could put out a press release, and maybe I should just automatically do that, and then I can say, I did my part, the media didn't pick it up. I think that's the struggle we have right now with some of the.
Or you're just posting it on your website. I mean, even that's. But
Yeah, that would have been good, because I too was wondering what the heck is.
And as a member of the media now, I'm not in Chippewa County, I'm in Durand. But there are a lot of times, now I don't know what happens here. I will tell you though that in Durand, when the county, I very rarely go to the county board meeting because it's the exact same night as the Durand City Council and the Durand School Board. And with respect to the county board, the school board and the city council are gonna have a lot more stuff I need to talk about. That could be part
Ours
of
is
it.
not, but I get it.
But on election night, it would be nice from a media standpoint. Now, I'm in a great spot because I know we're so small in Pepin County, but you know, in years past when I worked in Sparta and in Toma, we actually had a town that hadn't checked in, and thankfully we had called the clerk called the town, and they found that the town person had just forgot to call and just took the ballots home in their trunk and was going to call them in the morning. So, but it would be nice though to have that two-way communications just in case, because sometimes I've got that during that election I actually got calls down in Durand. Hey, do you know what's going on up there? No, I don't. So
Everything is backed up with paper in the state of Wisconsin. There is not a single election process procedure that's not backed up on paper. So the idea that somebody can hack the results and change the results from Chippewa County or into the state website or whatever, we will find it because every single thing is on paper. Nothing's completely electronic.
I was just gonna say one more thing, and it's good to hear this. We have, you know, like the city of Altoona or town of Washington, they're 2 of our bigger townships. They have multiple DS200 machines that transmit, and so they'll transmit them one, and then the other one would be 10, maybe sometimes 10 or 15 minutes later. But when the first transmission comes through, it looks like Washington is reported. And so it might only be half of the results. And so, I've tried to get a little note on the results sheet that says that, you know, all of Washington's not in or all of Altoona's not in, but sometimes I'm busy doing other things and you realize that, oh, half of Altoona came in and it looks like this person win and it looks like this is fully reported and it's not. So, you know, little things like that, we want to just, you know, like you said, be aware that people are questioning, you know, people may think that this is complete and they're not, the results are not complete because there's multiple machines that need to report to us, so.
So on the state level, they support counties and municipalities on election day, election night. Do we have anything else to say about that?
Nope, that's it.
We did, okay. And we already did questions, so we're done with that. Security and transparency. This was what I just said, voter verifiable paper ballots. Megan, would you like to talk about that? Secure air gap networks and all of that fun stuff?
I think this might be.
Yes.
No, you're good.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're gonna defer to Clear Ballot representative now.
Yeah, so, thank you for having me. And so I just want to preface this by saying, so I'm from Clear Ballot. A lot of you may not have heard of Clear Ballot. We're the voting system in Chippewa County and in Sheboygan County. So I can only speak to those two counties. I can only speak to the equipment behind me. So bear that in mind as I answer these questions. So you may not have heard of Clear Ballot, and I'll try to keep this brief in the interest of time. I know it's getting late. So we were founded originally as an election auditing company, actually. We had developed a software that could read other voting systems' ballots to verify that election results were accurate. And from that beginning and that interest in transparency, we ended up developing a voting system and taking that software and developing our own system. The basis of our system is always paper. We believe very strongly, the way that the state of Wisconsin does, that having voter verifiable paper ballots as the core of the system is very important. So the machines you see behind me are an example of the equipment used here in Chippewa County. So there's the Clear Access system here on the right. That is your ADA compliant ballot marking device for voters who are maybe blind, low vision, have physical impairments that don't allow them to fill in that oval themselves. And the system on the left is called ClearCast. So that is the actual tabulator. So I think what's important to know here, beyond that it's a paper system, so voters are filling out those paper ballots. The system on the right can only mark ballots. So all it can do is essentially function as a giant pen for voters who aren't able to mark their own ballot. And the system on the left can only tabulate ballots. It can't make any marks on it. All it does is scan the ballot and count it. So the core of the system really is those paper ballots because that creates an audit log. So after ballots are scanned, you retain that original voter verified paper ballot. And it's always there if you have to go back to it. If there's ever a recount, if there's ever an audit, all of those paper ballots exist and they're full paper ballots. We operate what are known as air gapped networks, and so what that means is that these things can't talk to each other. They can't connect to the internet. They can't connect to Bluetooth. As mentioned, our system doesn't actually have the modems in it. It doesn't have that capability. So there's nothing to connect to. And all of the pieces operate on these secure networks that the computer that Jackie uses at the end of the night to compile the results doesn't talk to anything else, you know. Like that machine can't talk to something else. The other core of our system that I want to point out, and this is what we originally developed, is this thing called vote visualization. So at the end of the night, when all the ballots, or it might not be that night, but when the ballots all come back and all the ballot images come back to Chippewa County, our software has this thing called vote visualization, where if there's a race that's close, or Jackie just wanted to do like a double check of something, she can actually go into a contest and pull up all of those ballot images and all of those oval markings to just do a visual check that things are good, and can go through it and pull up votes and make sure that like things were counted accurately, things were counted as intended. just like an extra layer of transparency, it's an extra layer of security. In the interest of security, I do want to say that, you know, as mentioned earlier, all systems in Wisconsin have to be both federally certified and state certified. So our system is EAC certified. It meets all of the standards for federal certification. And then it's also separately state certified in Wisconsin. We're actually this week in certification for the newest version of ClearVote. And so our systems are tested, and they're not tested by us, they're tested by third parties that say that, like, yes, the software works as intended, yes, it's counting votes accurately. And we build our systems to what's known as VBSG standards. And you may hear this word kind of going around a lot. So VBSG is called the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines. It's developed by the EAC. And it's called voluntary, but you have to build your system to those standards. And they're set of like security protocols and things that they require systems to have. So all of our systems are built to these VBSG standards. And we're currently working towards, there's going to be new VBSG 2.0 standards in the future that we will work to develop and make sure that our system meets as well. And those have, you know, extra layers of security as well. So that's a really quick rundown. I think if I can impart just a few key takeaways for you, it does not connect to the internet. The paper ballot record is always there and is the final say. Should there ever be like an audit or recount, you know, like those paper ballots are stored and they are able to be brought back up and looked at. And you know, like from the time that the system is brought out, you know, it has to be tested by Jackie, you know, it has to be certified by the state. It's not something that is just like rolled out and handed to someone and goes into a polling place. Just another fun thing for you to know. So I mentioned we were started as an election auditing company. We're based in Boston. That's where I flew out of. We actually manufacture all of these things in New Hampshire. So it's not Wisconsin, but for us, it's close to home where we manufacture. So that's a very high level summary. I'm happy to take questions. Like I said, I can only speak to this equipment and that's used in Chippewa County. But happy to answer questions if there are some. Sure.
So Chippewa County has the current equipment, you're coming out with a new version. Are we now forced to go with a new version?
So my understanding is we will not be getting the new equipment. They are also having like the software upgrade certified at the state level too. And if that certification goes through, ClearBallot will come here late summer, early fall, and update the software, the look of it. And then they're going to do a maintenance check, make sure everything is working properly, anything that maybe needs to be replaced as we head into 2024.
Yeah, and the reason that we upgrade the software, it's not to like force change. Typically, if we want to add security patches or we want to, just keep things on the latest version of software. So just like your computer has to run updates, we try to upgrade our systems often enough to make sure that we're applying the latest security patches and that we're making sure our operating system and everything is up to date, because that helps keep the system running for as long as possible.
What's the life expectancy of this system?
So that's a great question. Ultimately, it's kind of up to counties. So some counties will have equipment for 10 years. Some counties may have equipment for 15 years. It's going to depend on it. Another fun fact is this equipment behind me was our first in-person equipment, and we brought it to Wisconsin first. So we've been in Wisconsin since I think 2018, before I joined the company. But so it's been here for about 5 years, and it, to my knowledge, no one's told me differently, it's still running great. So that will be something that the county will decide as time goes on, if it starts to get worn down or anything, what that changeover process looks like for them. But it's an investment, and we recognize that. We're not going to come in every 3 years and be like, hey, we want to buy new equipment.
And I know we're really short on time, but I kind of want to explain how we came to the conclusion, I don't want you to think like we're crazy because there's only 2 counties in the state that have this equipment, because there's
I'm
a lot of,
wondering, yeah.
there's a lot of states that have their equipment, it's not just us. So, with the state has 3 companies that are certified. We brought in all 3 companies, we brought in the municipal clerks, poll workers, and said, we're gonna see a demonstration of all 3 companies. Gave them surveys, feedback, so we could hear how they felt on it. Then myself, my 2 deputies in my office, we did a demonstration on the programming side of it with all the companies to see which one is most user-friendly, what makes sense, how that works. And then after that, we also then had a conference call with each of the companies and our IT department, because they're gonna know more of that technical side. I'm not gonna understand all of that technical side. And hands down, all 3 of those meetings, Clear Ballot was hands down the choice.
Because of the paper.
Paper, the user friendliness of it. Like if you just, the old system we had to use for programming was like DOS, like black screen, you know, true programming. This is more like word-based and it's a lot easier to use. We have some clerks here, the training, the voter users of the machines, it was so much easier, smaller equipment than some of the other one. Like if you look at some of the other companies, it's 80, I mean like what is the Command Central one is like huge box.
So if they move away from paper, what's your reaction as our county clerk?
We're not gonna move away from paper. The state of Wisconsin legislature is leaving. So we gotta move on, if you don't mind.
We're not gonna move away from paper.
No.
We can
I
move
would,
on.
I would never vote for that. I mean, I don't have a vote in that thing, but if they ever asked my opinion, that would not be anything that I would ever be in favor of. 'Cause how-
Most of the states have, that did away with paper and did the touch screen without the paper backup. What happened, Megan? They all went back to paper. So that is, they all,
Yeah, it is required by state law. So the
Yeah.
law, you know, the legislature would have to change the law, the governor would have to sign it to get rid of paper. Every single ballot cast in the state of Wisconsin must have a paper, verifiable paper trail. And like was mentioned, if there's a recount, the paper is what, you know,
Yeah.
you're looking at as the official artifact of the election.
okay, let's move to post-election city, town, village, quickly.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. So after the election, we have all of the information as far as the poll books are considered. We have to enter all of that into WisVote. That's where things like a person who voted in another city and then voted here, they get caught right away when we enter in the data. It also catches things, you know, like I mentioned earlier, where it's like a senior and a junior. So we go through all those. It takes a long time, especially if it's a big election. It can take up to really close to a month for us to do it. And then as we do that, all that information goes into WisVote, which then you can see on MyVote if you want to track and see if your information was collected. I take the county side of things over there to the county for them to store. I store all of our stuff in our separate storage. Then usually what we do is, like I said, we'll have our municipal board of canvas Friday after the election. That's also open to anybody who's interested in watching something like that. And I said that. Yeah. So it's very exciting. You can also go to the county board canvas, which is even more exciting. So then afterwards, for the bigger elections, we'll get an audit. The city of Eau Claire always gets audited. Thank you. And that's basically like doing a mini recount. And we'll sit there, like I said, we go through, we break all the ballots up for a few select wards into piles of 50. And we go through and we hand tally all of it to make sure it matches the results that we got on election day. Yeah, and you have that picture of a poll book. So that's what poll books look like. Usually not quite so neat, but that's what we enter all that data into into WisVote. Quick enough.
Yep, very good. County Board of Canvassers.
So again, the County Board of Canvas is always open to the public, and it's basically, it's making sure everything matches up, right? Like the poll book numbers, the number of voters, the number of ballots, and double checking that the results that they called in to us basically on election night, that we heard them right, or they said the number right. So sometimes you might see a little bit of change, like they said 481, and it really should have been 491, because they couldn't tell the 8 and the 9 apart or something. But that basically, it's us just, and again, the Board of Canvas is myself, another person from my office, and then there's someone the Republican Party sends and someone the Democrat Party sends, and they are the ones that are verifying the information. And if something were to be a question, like why is there one less ballot than voters? Well, sometimes a voter decides to not put their ballot in the machine, or what, you know what I mean? And that's when we look at that inspector statement, why is there a discrepancy? And then it would be up to them whether they want to take any action on that, or if that's an okay reason. Again, the goal is that everything always matches up and you don't have any of those discrepancies.
So do you have all Democrats on your Board of Canvas?
Nope.
Oh. What does the law require?
One from each party.
Plus the county clerk, whatever the.
Then I have a person that does the minutes for us.
Yes.
And if there's minutes taken.
So
out,
it's also balanced out at a partisan level when you do the Board of Canvas. It's open to the public, and I don't know about you, have you ever had any public come? They posted it as a public notice.
I think one time. I think one time.
Did you?
So, and I would say this too, everything about the election process is open. You can come watch me do the public test. You can come watch us do Board of Canvas. You have questions about how we're filling out the absentee log, or how we're entering it in the voter system, come on in, sit down. But for some reason, nobody ever takes me up on my offer. You know?
Maybe if you had snacks.
That's the key, Travis, all right. I will say snacks provided.
We've actually started our Board of Canvases online live, so if you really want to.
Oh,
watch us
very cool.
talk, look at tapes.
High tech there.
We did do that during COVID when the courthouse was full, like we had everything was live streamed.
Did it go viral or no?
Ours did not. Even my husband watched, like the first 5 minutes, he goes, "That's awful boring, I'm not watching it anymore." Thanks.
Okay, at the state, post-election, result certification.
Well, nothing is more exciting than the state's canvas and certification. And there's actually one happening tomorrow. So there was a special election in Assembly District 24. And so tomorrow the chairman of the Wisconsin Elections Commission will be holding the state level canvas and certification of that race. But you know, the real takeaway here is there are 3 levels where every single election has to get certified. So at the municipal level, they have to make sure everything works out, right? Do they have more registered voters or do they have more votes that were cast than they have registered voters? That can't happen. That's a problem. You'd have to go back and figure that out. If you didn't, the county's gonna catch that and they're gonna send you back and say, you've gotta reconvene, you've gotta figure this out. We cannot certify this election because the numbers don't match. If for some reason something got through those 2 checks and it came to the state, and we see that you have more votes cast than you have registered voters, or you have more absentee ballots that you counted than you had absentee ballot requests, we're gonna say, we can't certify that. The chairman of the commission will not certify that, and we're gonna send it back down, and they're gonna have to reconvene their boards of canvas and tell us what happened and go through the legal process to reconcile that before we can certify. So that's why it takes almost a month to certify an election. So when you're seeing that ticker on election night and it's saying that, you know, there's this many votes in each jurisdiction, that number is subject to change for very good and very important reasons. Because all this work is happening to make sure those numbers are right. And just like was stated, every single part of that process is public. And so you can come watch that. We live stream our canvas as well, and so you can watch that process as it happens too. Another thing we do at the state is we facilitate that post-election audit. So the 6-member commission, they're the ones that by law get to determine what that post-election audit looks like. So back in the day when elections were, you know, sleepy and nobody really cared as much about the process, the commission said we're going to audit 2% of the the ballots that were cast in the state. And so they randomly select jurisdictions, and 2% of them, they would do that recount process where you're comparing the ballots to the machine count and making sure everything adds up. Well, now the commission is up to more than 10% of ballots that are cast that are audited. So that means in communities all around the state, after election day, they're gonna be doing that audit, and you can come watch. They're gonna actually take those paper ballots, make sure that the paper totals match their machine totals. And all of that then has to be reported up to the state. We put out a great big report after each election that aggregates all that data reported to us by each of the jurisdictions that's selected. And then the commission takes a look at that, and if they see there's some kind of issue, they're gonna go back and say, well, is there a problem with the voting equipment? Do we need to decertify it? Do we need to amend our certification? What needs to happen? The commission has not yet, through that process, identified an issue that was a machine issue. They're usually human issues. So I'll give you an example. They once found a very small number of ballots as part of that audit where a crease in the ballot. So let's say a jurisdiction ran out of the pre-folded ballots and they folded them themselves, and the fold went through one of the write-in lines. In that instance, the machine was counting that as an overvote. It wasn't attributing a vote to somebody incorrectly, it was counting it as an overvote. And so during that audit, they were able to see that that was just a line caused by a crease through a write-in vote. There wasn't actually something written in there. And that impacted about, I think, 2 or 3 ballots in that particular jurisdiction. It wouldn't have changed the outcome. But that's how minute the detail is in those audits, is the commission is actually looking at that. And even if 2 ballots have a crease that went through the wrong place, they're seeing that, and they've actually ordered additional training. And they even worked with the vendor in that situation to modify the conditions of, what would trigger an overvote and how that programming was allowed to be done. And so it's a really, really important process that happens here, and I only expect that the commission will continue to increase the number of audits that are required to be conducted.
I'm going to comment on the Electronic Registration Information Center. This is another item that has been under attack. I brought this to the legislature for a way to verify who or how many people are voting in more than one state. It's the only system in the entire nation that we have available to us that does a cross-check among states. Not all states are members. It's membership driven. It's the ERIC system was started by Pew Charitable Trust. They walked away. The member states actually take control over the organization and share the data. A lot of Republican states have walked away from ERIC. I think out of political pressure, that is really nonsensical to me. Don't you want to know if people, well, I'll give an example. We had a student at UW-Eau Claire who voted at UW-Eau Claire. He voted in Appleton. Now, he told his district attorney he didn't know he couldn't vote more than once. I don't know how that went. But, so, we can tell in state who voted more than once because we share that in our state system. But we can't tell if a student from Minnesota voted in Eau Claire and then voted absentee in Minnesota, unless we're a part of this ERIC system. And so I presented this to my colleagues. Chris Kappinga, who understands electronics, did a conversation with IBM, which I can go into all the details, and I won't because it's late. But to me, it was the best way to check checks and balances for interstate fraud. And I think it's a good system. It's a deterrent because it doesn't do instantaneous check, but after the fact. And there's been a good number of them that have been caught and referred to district attorneys for prosecution. for the number of states that we've participated in. And I'll let Megan summarize the rest of the ERIC discussion if you find it necessary.
I think that's a good summary, is that, that's the unique thing Eric provides to us, is information from out of state, right? So our laws give us the ability to get information from our own DMV and from our own Department of Vital Records and other agencies, but I can't get information from Illinois' Department of Vital Records. So if somebody, let's say, is from Wisconsin, but they're a snowbird, and they go down to Florida in the winter, and unfortunately they passed away when they were in Florida, I'm not gonna get that information from my Department of Vital Records. So when Florida was a member, we would get their information, and they would actually be able to send that information, and we'd be able to remove somebody from the list if they died in another state. Like you said, if they voted in another state, that's a very serious matter, and we'd be able to get that information. We actually can get all of the voter registration forms, absentee applications, signatures, all sorts of things from other states that help to facilitate meaningful referrals that the commission can then make to hopefully convict people that have committed fraud. The numbers are still relatively small of people that do commit that type of a crime, but ERIC does allow us to get that data to be able to identify those instances when somebody has indeed, voted twice, voted once in Wisconsin and in another state. And without ERIC, we just don't have any ability
It's
to
a good
access.
deterrent, and we will have no longer the deterrent. So it makes no sense to me why you would want to give it up, but some red states have. 4-year voter record maintenance.
That's one of the few things that the state can do with list maintenance. So we talked about all the ways municipalities do list maintenance every day. At the state level, we've got one list maintenance that we are allowed to do under law, and that's 4-year maintenance. It's called 4-year maintenance, but it actually happens every 2 years. So after every general election, we're required to look at the voter rolls and identify people who have not voted in 4 years. Then those people get a postcard. The postcard says, you haven't voted in 4 years. If your clerk doesn't hear back from you that you want to stay on the list, you'll be deactivated. And so then on June 30th of every 2 years, people that haven't voted in 4 years, if the clerk doesn't hear back from them and get a postcard back where they affirm that they still live there, they're deactivated. They're removed from the list. And so that happens every 2 years that folks are removed from the list. We hear back from very few people that want to stay on the list that have not voted in 4 years, but it does happen. And also if the postcard is undeliverable. So when we send out all those postcards, a lot of them bounce back because the person has indeed voted, right? And when that postcard bounces back, those folks are removed from the poll list as well. And so you can actually see that data. It's all published and actually sent even to the legislature, but you can find that on our website, all the statistics of what happens during every 4-year maintenance that happens every 2 years.
Okay, so if I'm an indefinitely confined voter, that I may have registered accidentally as an indefinitely confined, or I took Scott McDonald's advice and registered as indefinitely confined. Do I always stay in indefinitely confined, or is there, if I vote in person, or what changes my indefinitely confined status?
Yeah, so your clerk can do outreach, and a lot of them do. So there's different letter templates even available through the WISPO system, where a clerk can check in with their voters and say, hey, does this status still apply to you, right? And so it's a good way for clerks to make sure that their lists are accurate without being too invasive, right? Because there's a lot of conditions where somebody is legitimately indefinitely confined, has a disability that might not be something immediately visible, but it allows the clerk to check in with their voters to make sure that that self-identified category still applies to them.
Okay, so if I don't return a ballot?
Oh, thank you. Yes, if you don't return your ballot, so if you're indefinitely confined, that means your clerk sends you a ballot for every election. If you don't return one, then you're removed from the list. There's a notification process, but you are removed from the list if the clerk does not hear back.
Yeah, so that was one of the major concerns by a lot of Republicans, is that too many people people were put on the indefinitely confined list. And matter of fact, some of them showed up to vote. If you show up at the polling place to vote and you're indefinitely confined, you're also taken off the indefinitely confined list. So you don't stay on there unless you're truly indefinitely confined. So that sort of has cleaned itself up over the past couple of years. Do you agree with that? Yeah. Okay. Elections in Wisconsin are a collaborative effort, to say the least. But I wouldn't have it any other way. A lot of states hire county clerks or clerk, I don't know, they're called all different things in other states. And then they have to go out and hire other people to run their polling places. And I just think that our municipal clerks have skin in the game. They're the people you voted into office at the town level or the village level, or people that work for city councils and village trustees, and they are accountable to the voters. And I think you couldn't find a better person to run an election than an actual municipal clerk who's there and you know them. So it might be a pain to administer, but by the same token, I've thought about this a lot. I don't know about you, Jackie. I've thought about this a lot. I'm like, wouldn't it be easier if the county clerks just go out and hire people? I'm like, oh, wait a minute. You can't even hire people to work nowadays. Can you imagine? It would be awful. So
The control person in me is like, I just want to do it all. I gotta trust everyone else.
Oh, well.
It works out.
I think we do well to trust those town, city, and village clerks to administer elections.
We have some really good ones.
I really, someday, we'll get into, the certification of, federal elections and certification of electors and how they're chosen. I kind of wanted to do that, but we ran out of time. But, just rest assured that I'm in the little room in the Capitol, and the Republicans are picking their electors, and then another room in the other part of the Capitol, the Democrats are picking their electors, and the dates and times, we can get that to you. If you would like a PowerPoint, send me an email to Kathy@keepourrepublic.com. I'd be happy to share the PowerPoint presentation and any other questions or concerns that you have that I happen to have a little expertise on. Either I made the law or helped administer the law. But these folks really do their level best. And like I said, it's fun sitting up here. The world revolves around Milwaukee. I don't know if you know that. When I was in the legislature, I found that out. How about you, Jerry? Yeah, the world revolves around Milwaukee, and I get that. There's lots of people in southern Wisconsin, but I just, I'm apprehensive of blaming them for not running decent elections when nobody has ever showed me that they haven't. And I went and observed. Girl from Chippewa Falls, Chippewa County, went down to Milwaukee. I voted absentee so I could spend a day going around to polling places in Milwaukee. And I didn't observe any crazy running them in, and they followed the same process that we all follow. And so let's cut them some slack. And we can't complain about something that we have no evidence that they ever did, right? Right, you're innocent until proven guilty. So I thank all of you very much for your patience. I thank all my presenters for being here. They're doing this out of the kindness of their heart. And my law enforcement, you now know everything about elections. And when your constituents complain, you will have all the answers.
I can give them your phone number.
Oh, you give them Jackie's phone number. Yeah. Not mine. Jackie.
Yeah, I heard they call you, and they call call her. and then-
That's fine.
Yeah.
I'll answer.
But when you have a concern, don't listen to these people from outside this state trying to drum up friction among the people of our country and the people of our state. Don't listen to them. Go to the people who know, who can give you the answers, who can explain things from the bottom up. And no, you can't do a mathematical equation to prove Donald Trump won the election. So,
The last thing I would like to stress from our side of the coin, I guess, is if you see something, say something. If you're worried about something, call us. I can't speak on behalf of all of the chiefs throughout the county, but I will tell you that if it happens in Chip County, we generally try not to play jurisdictional hot potato, right? So if you call the sheriff's office and something that happened in the city of Chippewa Falls, we're gonna direct you to the city of Chippewa Falls. We're also not gonna leave you hanging. So with that being said, we work very well with all municipalities, but just for reporting to the DA's office, if there is something, if you call our office and we say, well, you need to call the city, it's not because we don't wanna handle it, it's because the city has to make that referral to the DA's office because it happened inside of their jurisdiction. Does that make sense?
and if it's in Cadott, you might end up with a senator and a law enforcement officer.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
Quick, there's a lot of talk about undocumented,
Immigrants?
voters coming into this nation. So hopefully the powers to be are prepared for it.
So generally, if you're an undocumented immigrant, you can't get a driver's license in the state of Wisconsin, which I would argue is a bad thing, because I think we should get them a license that says for driving purposes only and a different shape and all of that, because we need to know who's in our state. We need to know who's in our country and in our counties. So I think that's a good thing. But when you go out there and you check that you're a US citizen and they run something on you, you don't want to get caught and deported. So I don't know, but I can surmise that there's not very many undocumented immigrants that are voting, not in this state. I can,
They have license. Just saying.
well, we have real ID now and they need a birth certificate.
I'm just saying.
Well, they sign a document if there's a complaint that this person is not a US citizen, then they get prosecuted. It's that simple,
Okay.
okay?
Kathy,
Yes.
I was a 2016 counter for the recount, and I'm here to tell you that it is thorough. We found very, very few mistakes. There was one township that had a few anomalies, and that's all they were human error. One of the parties had an attorney there for every one of the shifts that we had, which I thought was quite interesting. But again, it was pretty much exactly what you outlined here. We went back through when we did the recount. And I was amazed at how thorough it was. Now, this is now almost 10 years later, so we've even had more authenticity and ways of authenticating what we're doing. Anybody that thinks that this last election was rigged, I think that's...
Well, I don't begrudge anyone for asking questions and legitimate questions, because during COVID, we did follow different processes and we didn't follow the normal procedures. And so if there were questions about it, you have a right to ask the questions. And that's what I'm telling you. And saying, if you have questions about it, you come to the people who do it and you will get some answers. But not from all of these outsiders who are trying to make a name for themselves, and making outlandish accusations, and one said Clark County had, what, 13,000 votes that flipped, to Joe Biden? Or 16,000? Big number. More than they have registered voters. And so as soon as you hear statistical data like that, you can take that person and say, they don't know what they're talking about and don't listen anymore. So, I don't know, we're just out here. We're gonna celebrate our 250th birthday in the United States. We cannot have this division among Americans and survive. We can't. We will not see another 250 years, if we even make it to 250 years. We have more in common than what we don't. And we need to unite, and we need to accept election results when they are certified. We need to accept them, and the federal government, the people in Congress, the Department of Justice, or whatever, they might not like the person that was picked in 2016, but they needed to let him govern. Nobody's innocent in all of this, and we're just not going to accept it anymore. So, when the electors have spoken, we're going to respect it and move on. Contact your congressman and tell them that you want honesty, integrity in the federal government, just like we have at the local level.